The quotation from Harold Whitman, just on the screen, reminds me of a scene in Antonioni's movie, The Red Desert, at a cocktail party, and a man at the cocktail party is trying to seduce Monica Vitti, the heroine, and he says, "You're beautiful," and she says, "No, I'm not beautiful. I've seen beautiful women, and I'm not one of those, but I'm awake." And so few people are that most people mistake it for beauty. Right? At 70 years old, I'm interested in the next generation with hope, the condition that makes one hope for it, and think one sees it from here and there emerging. Began, as far as I can tell, in the 1980s. I remember being shocked by a statement by a then prominent literary critic to the effect that, well, literally, he said, that from this point on, literature has become an ancillary activity of criticism. A few years later, at a Soho dinner party, this is when the art world was still in Soho, a still prominent art critic said the same thing, that visual art proceeds from theory, and it's not the other way around. At another dinner party a few years later, a prominent sculptor, American sculptor, said in response to a dinner guest's question that it was no longer possible for an artist to make a work of art in direct and immediate response in the feelings or the mind to something in the world, and added, almost verbatim, "I would rather buy a work of art, no matter how ugly, that had been written about in a journal, than buy a work of art, no matter how beautiful, that hadn't joined the discourse of its time." Despite the fact that the discourse of any time is often catching up with the beauty of a previous time. Art criticism has progressively become more involved with the interview, which now identifies art with biography and success. And art criticism has also recently claimed that art is not in the objects, but in the artist's ability to manipulate the art market. In such a situation, when criticism is looking at and hoping to find the cutting edge, we are allowing special interests to take us for granted. 3 or 4 years ago at the Wadsworth Atheneum, by special interests, a prominent U.S. curator claimed that criticism was obsolete. The task of sifting and judging was now in the hands of curators and dealers. Special interests. We are being taken for granted that we will acquiesce in judgment, and we are becoming alienated from the object, and we are adrift. I know some emerging photographers indicate to me that they have an alternative based in both the object and tradition, but with respect to tradition, with a difference, and I present some of them here. The first is Paola Ferrario, living in Holyoke, Massachusetts, in her 40s. By the next generation, I must think we have to include the emerging, no matter how old. She's just finished a 6-year appointment as visiting artist at Smith College. Born in Italy, Guggenheim Fellowship recipient with other grants and awards. Can you see this? This is going to be difficult. Well, this one is easier. These are diptychs. This is blood on a piece of cardboard with a fish measuring device, and these are, of course, snowshoe tracks in the snow. Now, artists have been making diptychs concerning variations on visual form, common visual forms, for centuries. This is an Andy Warhol Elvis. This is, what can we do? Hans Baldwin Green, Three Graces. Can you see it all? Yeah, I can't. This is the 15th century, and this from 17th century India, small ivory case with the same thing. But for Paolo Ferrario to discover, to show us variations of a different kind, in which not only blue on brown is a variation of brown on blue, but numerals on a tree for some forestry purpose, seen with this ornamental deer, become ornamental themselves, together with the ornamental objects of the elements of the lampposts. These variations are correspondences as well, in the sense of that famous sonnet by Rimbaud, which identifies specific colors to specific vowels. And visual intelligence this far-reaching also recalls something the great Hungarian photographer André Kertész said to me during an interview in 1983. "I don't do very much," he said. "Nature starts the thing, and I complete it. That's all." For Ferrario, in the imagined world of her art, the world presents individual panels for a possible composition, events and objects far-flung geographically and far apart in time, waiting for the artist to come to assemble them in one of the possible combinations and compositions. Okay, now, working in New York is Baron Rockman, also in his 40s, recently MFA, Brooklyn College, teaches at the ICP and exhibiting like Paolo Ferrario in the Northeast. His subject is people in New York, in public places. His medium, the 35mm camera. His tradition, what is erroneously called street photography, but which properly called in art historical terms is figure and figure group compositions. Now, non-traditionally, such compositions present three aspects of human processes and properties: action, feelings, and relationships. This is Raphael, this is Picasso. It's the same. It hasn't changed. Now, the feelings in Rockman's pictures are subtle, sometimes fugitive, but they're there. The relationships are obvious. But what action, can one say, occurs in a photograph imaginatively like this? The clue to an answer lies in Delacroix's great composition, The Women of Algiers. The woman on the right is acting. These three women, who are almost passive, are so well integrated into the room, space itself, and the composition that they can be said to inhabit it. And as they inhabit it, they articulate those three things in such a way as they make an order which is new, not that of the room, not that of space, not that of, but only that of the composition, which is an imaginative room and an imaginary space. Now, when that kind of inhabiting occurs to that degree, that is what civilization is. We civilize by ordering the wilderness. And this order has been quoted, mentioned by W.H. Auden, great masters who have shown mankind an order it has yet to find. So, Rockman's pictures, the action of his pictures are of New Yorkers civilizing the wilderness of New York. And because it is the wilderness of New York, he must preserve randomness in his subject and create order in the composition. This is not easy to do. These random-looking pictures make previous so-called street photography look like completed things. In other words, he's one of the only photographers after Gary Winogrand who knew and really knew what those photographers of the past were doing. And it is this action of civilizing the world that keeps his pictures from being both illustrations and documents. So, okay. And I think there's one more. Right, hard to see. Now, hold it for a second. Artists like Ferrario and Rockman might just be creating a condition, if there are more like them, that is similar to the condition Gustave Courbet created in 1849 when he put two people in a landscape and called it the Stonebreakers. Now, artists have been putting two people in a landscape for centuries before. This is Peter Paul Rubens, Sir Pan and Syrinx. Courbet does nothing different. He uses exactly and all the same visual means as Rubens. For example, the great, strong variation in the legs, strong variation in the garments, you can see it, and the integration of the figures into the landscape and composition. But he does so in non-canonical means. He and Ferrario are stepping outside the canon with their feet firmly planted in tradition. It's not paradoxical. Right? Now, the next four photographers are my students. I show them not as advertisements for my teaching, but as examples of what happens when this same process occurs. The first is Bernd Reinhardt from Los Angeles, who is making a civilization of Hollywood Boulevard, and in so doing, exploring the meaning of action and feelings and relationship in these new ways, looking for and finding actions where you can't see it in there. The feelings as actions and action as the feelings and compositions like which we've never seen. And to the point where one can say that his pictures attenuate action, feelings, and relationships in space, which is in part a literary idea, but he formed his artistic ideas on modernist poetry, American modernist poetry, as a student in Germany. Okay, next, Lisa McCarthy in Hawaii, a trained classical musician turned to visual art, making photographs of her small island. And she calls the groups etudes, as in music, in which she explores the latent relationships among and between things in the neighborhood itself. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, can't see it, it's a corner of a room, 8. 8, it's a corner of a building. So the corner of the room is concave, the corner of the building is convex, and it's this similar thing, but you couldn't see it. All right, now, 2 young men in Singapore. Benedict Chen, who is 22. His friend Yuriko Liu, who is 19. They've been photographing together for 2,000 years, not working on the same projects, they've just been friends, companions. They make between 1,000 and 2,000 photographs a month. And fine, good. And they have been struggling to get the crowded, exuberant city they live in into pictures, and they have been inhibited by their young, very young adherence to that tradition. Winogrand, Robert Frank, Henri Cartier-Bresson, and others, again erroneously called street photography, until larger tradition liberated them, larger tradition of pictures. You have to stop thinking of photographs as photographs. You have to start thinking of them as pictures, because then you can connect with the much larger tradition of picture making, which has been going on for thousands of years. For Chen, it was, Max Beckmann, the German painter of the 1930s, in whose packed compositions, forcing the edges, forcing the backgrounds into near abstract shape, in whose crazy delineations of eyes, noses, mouths, almost like cartoon characters, he saw something that corresponded directly to him, and he changed. I don't know, well, another one there, finding his own kind of intensity and his own empathy with his own subjects. He no longer looked for Gary Winogrand's subjects or for anybody else's. And Eureka Liu, every 10th or 15th picture that I saw over 6 or 7 months was what is known in art historical terms as landscape with figures. The rest of it was just street photography, and he had no relationship with those people as such. But when he saw what he could do by moving away and having a visual appetite commensurate with himself, and discovered Poussin with his structures and trees, and Canaletto in Venice, who understood how to do this here, and Liu also discovered the great pleasure of seeing small figures, human figures, because from a great distance they are very small. Yet, and he discovered also that when they are in the right order, in the space, among trees that are reaching towards Poussin's trees, because of their place in the composition, that trivial, what we might think of as trivial gestures, ordinary, commonplace at any rate, when multiplied enough, inform each other with a radiance and appeal to the empathies in ways that they would not when they are 5 feet away from him with a big 21 millimeter lens. So he makes them now. There's another and another. Now, here, to see what they are when you get up close, these are big prints so that you can see them. You can see how individual all these people become because of the multiplication of ordinary gestures. And another one is here. So, now, these young men are very young, but all of these photographers, there is no telling where development will lead. One cannot, with work like this, carried on this intensely, with this literal understanding of the great tradition of picture making itself, one cannot tell one cannot predict where it will lead. This man has already begun photographing in Singapore's great, vast malls. Some of them are 6 or 7 stories high. He's discovered them as landscapes. But landscapes inside of a mall are different things. The form of his pictures are changing, exactly as the great Greek, ancient Greek literary critic Longinus said in his great essay on the sublime. technique influences form, form influences technique, technique influences content, content influences form. It's a reciprocal relation of development. So, and one painter whose work I followed for a long time, now 7 years, whose artist statement is interesting. I take a 21st century approach, an appropriation of styles created by 20th century avant-garde, because my aim is to keep the objective balanced with the subjective approach to art. I focus on the most visually based eras prior to postmodernism. One could say that I sample or loosely appropriate purified styles and combine them into new works, a synthesizer. I lay out sketches on large canvas in a manner technically derived from gesture studies of academic painting or drawing that can lead to composed works with a loose line and form. Then I build and rework. It often comes to a brutal battle for me where I feel as though the painting is alive and fighting me, or maybe refusing me at every turn. It's like a war. Often my final brushstrokes are a final blow to the work, and that's it. I'll show you 4. Okay? Almost monochrome and highly colored. Okay. Fine. Next slide. Now, Paola Ferrario says of her teaching, I don't train them, I don't teach them to be the next cutting edge or the new trend, but I do teach them to make very good pictures that are expressive of their life in their times, and there is a great deal to be said for that. The truth of that hit me a few years ago in the Bode Museum in Berlin, which is crammed with sculpture from the 14th to the 17th and 18th century, much of it anonymous. And also much of it by, well, this was okay, next, by very little known sculptors outside of the experts, all of it good. Hold it now. I visited the museum with the German artist Lothar Baumgarten, and when I saw this work, I said, it makes me feel as though the history of art cannot be written. Lothar said, I know what you mean. It also reminded me of the opening sentence of E.H. Gombrich's book, The Story of Art. It's a history of art, but he calls it the story of art. The sentence is, there is no such thing as art. There are only artists. Okay. As for theory, these young photographers and middle-aged, these emerging photographers probably ascribe to this sentence, or by Marguerite Yourcenar, the Emperor Hadrian in her novel reflects on his career as an art patron and collector. Our art is perfect, that is to say completed, but its perfection can be modulated as finely as can a pure voice. We have still the chance to play that skillful game of perpetual approach to, or withdrawal from, that solution found once for all. We may go to the limit of control or excess and enclose within that beauteous sphere innumerable new constructions. Theory. The work of art, said Alberti, must hold the eye and soul of the observer. In Italian and Latin, the eye comes first, as it must. Poussin, and thus we conclude that painting is nothing but an idea of incorporeal things, even though it shows physical bodies, for it represents only the order and the mode of the species of things and is more intent upon the idea of beauty than anything else. John Constable, 1833, Gainsborough, he said, has been compared to Murillo by those who cannot distinguish between the subject and the art. Picasso, through art we express our conception of what nature is not. Composition, without which a picture loses its slight chance for beauty, and Wallace Stevens, poetry and painting alike create by composition. These are artists speaking. We should go for theories of art, we should go to the artists. They're the ones who theorize from the inside, from the point of making it, or to the rigorous philosophers. Art is the creation of forms, symbolic of human feelings, Suzanne Langer. I haven't found it to be wrong, and I haven't found anything better. And as for what an artist is, Marianne Moore's essay, Humility, Concentration, and Gusto, is important. Concentration, she says, is impassioned explicitness, enabling an immediate meaning and a possible meaning. Gusto, the helpless sincerity which precipitates a poem or a picture. It thrives on freedom, and freedom in art, as in life, is the result of a discipline imposed by ourselves. Humility is armor, for it realizes that it is impossible to be original in the sense of doing something that has never been thought of before. And it's an indispensable teacher enabling concentration to heighten gusto. The thing is to see the vision and not deny it, to care and admit that we do. These artists are isolated. They might be even ignorant of each other. For them to become the next generation, we need also the next generation of curators, critics, and dealers with the ability to see the vision and not deny it, to care and admit that they do. Thank you.